This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the 4th week of November 2013. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about this week. Less than a week after UFC 167, the controversial fight between George St. Pierre and Johnny Hendricks, there is so much to talk about that doesn't even really involve the fight itself, but we will conquer all of that and a lot more as we head into the big December month for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Of course, we have our usual A-team panel here with us. We've got Luke Thomas of the SiriusXM Fight Club and MMAfighting.com. We've got Mike Chiappetta of FoxSports.com, and then the man with the hat, our own Chuck Mindenhall. This time I said your name. Guys, so much to talk about, of course. UFC 167, a great event for the UFC, 20th anniversary show, but also somewhat controversial, and the aftermath, in my opinion, the aftermath, as interesting as the fight itself. And let's talk about the aftermath first. UFC President Dana White getting a lot of heat for his comments about GSP at the post-fight press conference, and even in interviews afterwards, he is sticking to his guns, saying GSP is coming back, he needs to come back, he needs to defend that title. And a lot of people getting upset about the word "owe," that he owes it to the UFC, the fans, and Johnny Hendricks. What do you make of the heat that Dana White has received, and is it warranted?
Oh, I think it's very warranted. Very few times will MMA fans, or UFC fans anyway, will they turn on Dana White. Very, very, very rarely. He usually commands their respect for a lot of good reasons. One time he didn't do it was when he had the video incident with Loretta Hunt. The other time was, I think, believe it or not, the Sopa Pippa thing. And then this one. These are the three ones that stand out in my mind where they have turned on him. You know, I thought what he was saying at that press conference was frankly unnerving. You know, to say that this guy who is clearly troubled, now what his troubles are, Dana probably knows better, clearly knows better than us, but to say he owes you is scary. He doesn't owe anything beyond what it is contractually obligated and what he would care to preserve in terms of their informal relationship, because he's had a good relationship with the UFC. To suggest beyond that is to suggest he doesn't have agency over his own decisions. He is an independent contractor.
Just to butt in, contractually obligated, doesn't he have to fight? Isn't that part of the contract?
Certainly does not. No. Okay. Now, there's a flip side.
If he signs like a 4-fight deal, isn't that part of the contract?
Well, no, because he has what are they going to do, take him to court? If he doesn't do it, they have recourse, not least of which, and I think you wrote about this too, and I agreed with it, strip him. Take him off his title. But what the reality is he's fading GSP. I don't think some of his fans will admit it. He's fading. Hendricks is on the come up. They needed a clean transition because when GSP isn't fighting anymore, you're not going to get $900,000 paydays, or excuse me, $900,000 pay-per-view buy rates. Hendricks is going to be good for 3 or 4, maybe. That's a big decline. You need to transfer that star power, and they didn't get it cleanly. Saying he needs to fight, there is nothing he needs to do for the UFC. Nothing. Not one fight, not one press event, nothing that is more important than his mental health. Doesn't exist. So to suggest that there is demonstrably false and frankly ridiculous.
Is it possible, Mike, though, that his comments were somewhat misconstrued in the sense that, honestly, originally, the way I digested them, and even at the press event in New York on Thursday, Lorenzo Fertitta backed this up. He said, what I thought he was saying at the time was that he owes it to them to explain where he's at, to let them know. Dana White, leading up to that point, we asked him, a bunch of times, is George retiring? Has he told you anything? He said he hadn't told him anything. That he at least needs to know what's going on with the title and not hang it up. Is that the way you took it, or am I looking at this with rose-colored
Well, I
goggles?
think a lot of it got lost in the way Dana sort of put forth his message. The way Dana reacted to it in such a passionate, angry sort of way. I think that's something that people took exception with. The fact of the matter, I agree with Luke. I mean, I wrote a column about this for Fox Sports saying, George owes nobody nothing. He doesn't owe the fans. He doesn't owe Johnny Hendricks. He doesn't owe the UFC. He doesn't owe anybody. If you have a problem with the decision, that was not his fault, so it's not his problem to rectify it. I think that I understand why Dana is upset in the sense that, A, he told us, I went and asked George, are you retiring? He told me no. Listen, in a sense, they are business partners. George probably should have given him a heads up. Looking back on it, I think that's fair. That George would have been a better thing to do if he knew he was going to do this, instead of making it a public spectacle. I guess it would have probably been a little bit better for a partnership to kind of do it behind closed doors and then make the announcement, because there was just like a lot of confusion about what is he doing here? Where is he going? What's happening here? Not that George really owed that to them, that behind-the-scenes thing, but I think it would have been the right thing to do. And Dana, let's face it, he's a promoter. He's worried about his belt. You know, like Luke said, he wants to transition the belt to a new champion in the right way, not by stripping him. But, again, if George decides that he needs the time away, I asked this to Lorenzo at the press conference on Thursday as well. You know, why can't you just strip him of the belt if this is what he wants to do? If he says, I'm going to walk away indefinitely, I can't give you a time I'm going to come back. I don't know. I need to go somewhere and find myself or whatever it may be. Why can't you strip him of the belt? The fact of the matter is they can. That can be the way to do it. That's not how they want to do it. It makes a lot more sense to have it done inside the cage and be able to, you know, kind of bring some fans along for the ride. But George does not owe anyone that. And I think deep down that they know that. They want him to do it that way, but we'll see how it plays out.
It feels like when we're talking about owed, that's really the big problem, right? Like everybody jumped on this most bombastic critics of the UFC who are always going to be there, were the most heated about this, and it went down. You're right. It was one of those things where a lot of people responded, and I was sort of surprised by how many people responded against Dana White. But in a certain sense, Dana White is always Dana White. He's always going to say things out of passion like this. He's always going to say things without thinking things through. He's always going to do this. To me, it was all about there was no communication. I think he was trying to say is he was owed to know a little bit more than the rest of us before we all got thrown into the situation together. And that seemed to me his frustration. He was very upset with the judges. There were a lot of things. I'm not even trying to apologize for him because obviously that was wrong the way he presented it and all that stuff. But to me, it was like he was basically upset with the fact that he didn't know, which again would be against they market George St. Pierre. They do a lot of stuff. The belt, what's happening next, the matchmaking, everything that comes after this. To sort of vaguely throw it out there, like I might step away, all that. You could see how that would be a little disconcerting if you hadn't been prepared for it. Is all I'm saying. So to me, I didn't take it as egregious, but I have the full context of Dana White and what he usually does. I know that Dana probably didn't mean it exactly as it sounded. That's my interpretation of it. And we know that he's not going to apologize for that. And there is a dictatorship sort of going on and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I feel like we all took it a little too far out of context on that.
I was actually, when I wrote a column, I wrote it, in the immediate aftermath of the press conference, actually right after the press conference ended, I was surprised that people were, kind of went against Dana here. As you said, it's so rare. I thought for sure I'm going to put this column out and I'm going to brace myself for whatever backlash is going to come. And most people were like, totally agree with you. George doesn't know anything. And these are the fans who just watched and thought Johnny Hendricks won the fight. So if they don't feel like he owes, I think the UFC should feel the same way. This is such a grueling sport, physically, mentally, everything. You can't force, Dana has said it himself in the past, I can't force someone to fight. I can't force someone to go in there.
If he had just...
It shouldn't be any different.
If he had just retired. That would have been... Yeah, that's what I mean. Let's just say he was like, I'm done. They would have been interesting to see what his reaction would have been then. It still might have been a little bit upset, but I almost guarantee it wouldn't have been as crazy as just the vagueness of the statement. You know what I mean? Well, that's my standpoint on it. It seemed like he just didn't like the idea that he was just, I'm going to just take some time away, and that's his decision. That's really, Dana White should be involved in the decision. That seemed to be where the sparks flew.
Nick Diaz is using the word retire. He's not retired. He's retired until he decides he wants to do it again. How is that different than George St. Pierre? It's a difference without a distinction. He just used the clear...
He doesn't have a belt. That's the difference.
He doesn't have a belt. I understand. But the point being is there's a way to milk the system, and it's to say, I'm retired until, that's interesting, I'll come back. It's not real, I'm done. Yeah. It's not the same thing. George didn't want to put it in those terms because obviously it would carry more significance, but I just mean, if you look at in practice, what would the difference be between Diaz and St. Pierre? It's not a lot. Another thing, understand we're operating in a context after the whole Vada Wada thing. I don't want to get back into it, but this is a guy who went to the press and said the UFC let me down.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know what the reasons are. George St. Pierre is not a moron. I think he's a pretty thoughtful guy. He's operating in that context. If he didn't go to UFC brass, maybe I am just speculating, but it is conceivable that maybe he had a reason he didn't want to go. Maybe they're pushy people, and maybe he thought if he went there, they would try to talk him out of it, and he's struggling with something, and he didn't think that would be appropriate. Again, I'm not asserting that as truth, but I think every decision he makes, with the exception of how he handled it with Joe Rogan, he usually makes them pretty deliberately. So if he didn't, I'm wondering what the reason is.
I'm very happy you brought that up, because if you have paid attention to all the clues, even dating back to when he came to New York for the press tour, for the World Press Tour, he said, I have a big announcement that's going to surprise a lot of people. I have big plans for my career. Now, a lot of people took that as, is he moving to lightweight? Is he going to middleweight? He says that. Then he says he was very upset. He was so fired up about the Vada Wada thing. Then, you know, Faraz Zahabi says, oh, he might retire. Then backtracks, right? Then his mentor, Christophe Midou, tells the French newspaper La Presse, oh, he wants him to retire. These people aren't going to say that unless they know what's going on behind the scenes. And after the fact, I feel like the media has made it seem like the guy took so much damage in this fight and his other fights that he didn't understand what was going on. This is calculated. He's been wanting to do this for a long time, and I think he just felt like this was the appropriate time. So do you believe, that's my follow-up, do you believe that he is leaving because of the UFC, because he's just tired of dealing with the UFC, because he felt like he was, you know, put out there with the whole VADA thing, or do you believe that there are these issues that are bothering him?
Oh, I don't think it's because of the UFC. I think if you, they're having a, you know, a bit of a quarrel now, however serious or not serious. I mean, there's a little bit of dispute, obviously. But no, I think generally GSP's been good for the UFC, and I think generally UFC's been really good for, it's worked out for both parties. No, I don't think that's the case. I think two things have happened. One, George St. Pierre's tired. You know, I mean, the guy has been fighting just murderer after murderer, which is hilarious now because people are saying, as he's declined, well, he's finally fighting good fighters. You are so stupid. He has been fighting good fighters for a very long time, and it's taken a toll on him. I think the media and the travel and whatever else. The guy is, you're a different person at 32 and 33 than you are at 23. You're not the same guy. And real quickly, the last thing I'd say is I think, you know, as good as he is, and I still think he could beat Johnny Hendricks on a good day, he is not the guy he was in 2009. I think the guy who fought Thiago Alves, that was his athletic peak. I think the surgery has taken it out of him. And while still very good, I think he recognizes he's probably not the same as he was.
And no one has fought more time inside the octagon than him. He's taken a lot of punishment.
Luke kind of touched on it briefly with surgery. I mean, we kind of forget. I mean, the guy's fought 3 times in the last calendar year. He was coming off the surgery, had to go through the rehab and everything, and then gone through 3 back-to-back camps against 3 killers in a row. I mean, that's a lot to ask from a guy. You can't really blame him for saying, you know what, I need to step back for a little bit, you know, reassess my life, where I'm going. Let's face it, you know, you can't fight forever. Maybe he's coming to the realization that, you know, even if I'm not retiring, I'm pretty close to the end of the road. I need to kind of figure out my steps past that. Maybe that's a piece of it as well.
So when you say take a step back, is a lot different than retiring. And he didn't use the R word, right? He did not use the R word. But, you know, just as recently as yesterday, his camp telling me that it is possible that he was done, that everything he said, he knew what he was saying, and he meant it. So what do you think? Play as Dana said, what do you say, a Nostradana? That's what he called himself last week? Play Nostrachuk for me. Is he done? Will we ever see him fight
I don't think he's done. There's so many things that go into it. That he's one of those unique cases. If you talk to the people who, you know, his trainers and the people in his camp, you'll realize that he's a very special case because he's very superb what he does. He did come back from a major injury, which is amazing. Just for him to come back from that injury and to continue to beat these guys is amazing in itself. But you know, he's a competitor, but he's one of those guys who it terrifies him to fight. He's got to, I really believe he has to overcome so much within himself. I believe when you say he's exhausted, he's probably exhausted from his own thought process, his own you know, obsessiveness over getting in that cage and upholding all the stuff that we're talking about. So, you know, I think that he wants to get his head straight. Honestly, like when I really think about it just from those standpoints, he probably just doesn't want to have to deal with that right now. He doesn't want to have to think about that anymore. It seems like it takes him a lot to get in there. But having said all that, he is a competitor, and the way that this fight just went down with all the controversy, I can't imagine that this would be his last fight. I think that he'll want to go back in there against Johnny Hendricks and do it again.
So and Dana's saying the rematch is going to happen, but it's like one side is saying this, one side is saying that. Do you think his next fight is against Johnny Hendricks? Do you really think so?
I guess it just depends how long he wants to be out. I mean, just to kind of touch on Chuck's point a little bit, George is a guy, you know, he's never really loved fighting. You know, if you talk to the people that are around him, he doesn't really love it. Like, he loves the process of training and getting better at martial arts and this and that. But he doesn't really love fighting.
He loves the media, though.
Yeah, he loves us.
Who doesn't?
You know, if you talk to guys who have gotten to this high level that he has, and there's obviously only a few in our sport who've done it over time, the hardest thing to do when you become champion is to stay motivated, to motivate yourself to go through that daily grind, to try and make sure guys aren't catching up to you, because everyone's got it for you. Everybody in the division is looking up at you. You're the only target. To motivate yourself, to kind of, you know, keep them in the rearview mirror. when you're making millions of dollars and you're financially secure and probably all the other things you ever wanted in life, you've achieved them. You've achieved the money, the fame, the wins, the records, and you still have to find a way to motivate yourself to go into that gym and get beat up day after day after. That's not easy to do.
He's the guy, too. He's the poster boy for anything can happen in a fight because of the Matt Serra thing. So he's guarded against complacency. Since then, more than anybody, almost neurotically guarded against complacency. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's that guy.
Change his style.
Yeah. So it's like, it's one of those issues. You can see it covering him for all those years, how exhausting it actually is on him to do this, to maintain his style, what he wants to do, and how much he absorbs, how smart he is as a fighter. I mean, it's a lot that goes into a fight for that guy.
So what do you think, Luke? Johnny Hendricks, his next fight, is it against GSP in the not too distant future?
I don't know what the timeline's going to be. I would imagine it sounds like GSP is going to get strong-armed into coming back.
How can they strong-arm him? He has all the leverage at this point.
He needs to come back because I think at the end of the day, I think he's a company guy. At the end of the day, I don't think, not quite like Rich Franklin, who's like, I'll get on a bus,
right?
And we'll go tomorrow. I don't think it's quite like that. But at the end of the day, like you asked before, like they do have a long-standing relationship, and parts of it, I don't know to what extent, maybe none of it, but it seems like there's a little bit of late night fracturing there. But I do think in the end he'll probably go back. I think Dana White gets the fights he wants to get by and large. Couldn't get Fedor. That's about it. He got everything else.
I think this is a different case, though.
You don't think he's coming back?
George is a special
I think he will come back, but I don't think he will be strong-armed into doing so. I think George, I talked to him just before the fight, and basically I asked him like everybody else if he was going to retire, and what about these things that Christophe Madou and all these other people are saying? Listen, everybody can say what they want. I'm in control of my career. I'm the only one who's going to decide, and I believe him. Like he also has.
Right.
Listen, he has a group of guys around him that have been with him for a long time. Guys that really care about him. It's not like he's bounced all over the place and has. He's got roots. Guys who really care about him, who care about his health and well-being and everything else. I think if those people are in his ear, they're not going to push him necessarily to go back. They don't want to see their friend get hurt if his heart's not really into this. I think taking time away is a great thing for him. He could really determine, do I want to put myself through all that again?
I think he will retire.
And I don't think the UFC can strong arm him. He has all the leverage. That's the people who are.
No, I don't disagree that he has the leverage. But if you don't use your leverage or recognize that you have, or choose to use your leverage, things can go crazy. I think in the end, I hope you're right. I think in the end he's going to succumb. I think in the end he's going to fight one more time, and I pray to God after that he retires. What is there left to prove? I mean, who's he going to do? Beat Condit again? What's he going to do? He's going to beat Jake Ellenberger?
Maybe he wants to break Anderson Silva's record of title.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that.
At least the Ryan McDonald thing went away from him.
Yeah, thank God. I think he probably will come back. I don't know when, but I do think Dana White's going to get his way in there.
Listen, he hates bullies, right? How's he going to let Dana White bully him into fighting one more time?
Like I said, I hope you're right. I just think in the end, Dana White finds a way to get things done.
I agree that he'll come. I think he will come back again. I mean, he's 32. He's going to be like, I don't know, maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised
I think
if he's
going
out
to
for a year.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean that could be it.
Then what do you do with Johnny Hendricks then?
Push-ups, sit-ups.
Just don't fight?
No, I think I would. It would be give him an interim title if you want. I scored at 48-47 Hendricks. I think he won. This is one case where if they had to make the drastic measure, God forbid, of stripping St. Pierre, I don't think a lot of people would be like, what a phony title. I think most would be like, well, it sucks that it had to happen this way, but that's probably your king right there.
So at this point, you mentioned how you scored it. I don't think it matters at this point because enough time has passed, and he's the champ. He's the champ. But let's talk about the scoring system because this comes up a lot. Joe Rogan talks about it all the time. Kenny Florian wrote an article for FoxSports.com about it. 10-point must system. Is it time to change it? Is this the fight that gets us to the point where we actually have to change it? Because you look at the first round, it was so close, it was 10-9, right? 2 judges thought it was for GSP, 1 for Johnny. Then you look at the 5th round, everyone thought it was 10-9, and that was pretty easy to score. But are those 10-9s the same? You look at other fights, the 10-9 doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't cover everything that goes on in an MMA round. So is it time to change it, in your opinion?
It is, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I have an idea, and I floated it in my chat yesterday.
Okay, here we go.
On Wednesday.
Idea.
No,
let me take a drink.
I wish there was scotch in there. If the UFC is planning on international expansion to the degree where they're going to do 54 events next year, which almost makes me want to cry, but that aside, my tears aside, you have an opportunity. I think that the way Pride and ONE FC held their rules is they wanted to be different, but I think there is a cultural expression there, and that's where it begins and ends. You can get a little trapped up in. I think what they should do is not homogenize their products so much. I think what they should try, who cares? If you're going to have, UFC Nubs versus Nubs 2 at some place in the middle of, Quezon City, why not try and experiment with open scoring there? Why not try and experiment with the 1FC style where you judge a fight as a whole? Who looks back on Pride fights and says, Quinton Jackson versus Chuck Liddell, this is an illegitimate result because if only Ariel Helwani, if this had been conducted under the 10-point must system, then we'd know for sure who the real winner is. Nobody ever says that. I think that there are clear arguments about the 10-point must system that underscore what you're talking about. But the reality is all the suggestions, they're just hypotheses. And we don't really know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Maybe open scoring is a disaster. Maybe it's our saving grace. But going to places like Singapore and Malaysia and India and Russia, this is your opportunity to begin to play with the system a little bit, to try it out there on smaller cards without the hugely relevant fights and see what happens. If it doesn't work, we keep the 10-point must system. If it shows there are some changes to be made, we can start to make the product.
But what if we were to do that, though? Wouldn't it be better to do like real exhibitions, like the Ultimate Fighter content or something like that?
That's another way to try it as well. I'd be happy with that one as well.
So what about changing the entire system? Like
But it's codified into law. How are you going to do that?
Well, look, every time someone says that, the government regulates us, and I don't even want to get into it this time, but I just think the UFC should just go into business for themselves and regulate themselves. But
that's illegal.
No, but change the system. Curt Flood changed the way baseball was run, free agency. Fight the power. Honestly, you could go to the Supreme Court. You could change. Everyone could change. If I could change,
we were at the UFC press conference in New York on Thursday.
Sure.
We run to regulation. How could they run away from it in this case?
That's why. Anyway, that's my pipe dream. The point is, if you can change the system of scoring.
It's not a pipe dream internationally.
Right, yeah, they govern themselves.
It's tabula rasa over there. They can do what they want.
By the way, you mentioned all those events. There are probably going to be more events internationally than nationally. The point is, what about if you assign points to certain points of action? So a takedown will get this many, a sub-attempt this many, strikes this many, and then you calculate that, you add it up together, and that's how you determine who won the round.
What's a landed strike and what missed and what's a power punch
who's
and all that
determining?
stuff. Yeah.
How about this? How about if the referee signals it
That's
like in
what I was
wrestling?
going to say. Talking to Doc Hamilton, he had this exact idea, that there would be signals that would basically tell you what's going on. This would be a tally of an actual score.
Keep track of what's a landed strike? There's a guy on top of him.
He just signals, and then there's a scorekeeper.
Yeah, there's something.
So in a barrage, the guy's trying to finish a guy at the bottom, and the referee's supposed to be concerned about...
Well, they can't count every single one. Yeah. They can't count every single one, but the barrage is counted as a whole, and then they kind of, it's like Johnny Hendricks with the... Look, I'm trying to offer and not just criticize.
Everyone criticizes the system, which fine, okay, but you need to come forth with a real
I haven't sat down and put the actual hours that they need to do.
Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to do it.
But at least I'm offering some kind of
I think this is you're talking about like a revolutionary paradigm shift. I don't think that's possible.
Why not?
I think you can take what we have now as a basic framework, a flawed framework. The 10-point must system is sometimes effective, right? And then make adaptations off of that. It's a decent framework to, at least in part, or the round system where you could have judging a fight as a whole. But Jeff Blatnick, I asked him before he died, obviously, about this, and he said, if you get like wrestling and jiu-jitsu, which are combat sports and judo too, and you have points, people will play to those points, but it's a defined universe of things. Like there's no striking in jiu-jitsu, and in wrestling, there's no submissions. Like it's just a quiet little language. You can get away with it there. But in MMA, where it's just this cacophony of techniques, when people begin to play to it, it would take away the imagination and unpredictability of it. And that's what makes it a spectator sport, which is part of the reason why jiu-jitsu and wrestling and judo really aren't spectator sports, is because they're these little tiny defined villages. And I think that would be, I don't think it's just possible to get that far, and B, it would kind of ruin MMA.
I actually kind of think that all this conversation and controversy is good for the sport in the end.
Sure.
I mean, you have people talking about, I know people complain because it's like, you look at the rounds that Johnny Hendricks won, decisively, right? He won rounds
1, 2, and 4.
Okay, but most people figure he won rounds 2 and 4 very decisively. Like they were clearly stamped in his corner.
No doubt about it.
The rounds that George St. Pierre won were very close. The rounds 3 and 5 were most people, pretty much 95% of people agreed he won 3 and 5, and they were closer, right? So they're like, how is that 10-9 the same as Hendricks 10-9? Sure. And that's like sort of the complaint, but it's like, in other sports, like if I hit a home run, that one run is worth the same as a guy standing on third and the pitcher balks. The home run's a lot more spectacular, and you more earned what you got, but it's still worth the same. So it's not like it's something that doesn't happen in other sports.
A balk is rare from a guy standing on third.
A wild pitch, it happens. It happens quite a bit. A wild pitch, a block. I mean, an error, right? I mean, it's all worth the same as that guy hitting a home run, which is a lot harder to do. So,
but I think when people say that, the point is that you can do so much in a round. You can have like a pretty boring round where it's so like. Machida, Phil Davis. It'll be like, oh, that's a 10-9. And then you have like GSP or Johnny Hendricks in the fourth, where it was like completely one-sided.
Judges don't.
And then that's a 10-9 too. How could they both be the same?
Well, you know, I just when people look like say for the half-point round scoring, for example, as something that people have looked at. Yeah, it's a little confusing. Like, what's the difference between an 8.5 and an 8?
Yeah, it's too confusing.
I wonder, though, if it's really more confusing or if it becomes more simplistic, honestly. Because the gray areas really are between a 10-8, a 10, you know what I mean? Like, there's gray areas between scoring those types of things. Like, for instance, that could have been a 10-10 round, that first round. That could have been a 10-10 round. People are very, they don't want to give 10-10 rounds. It's just, most guys are reluctant to do that. So they have to give it one way or another. There was actually no real controversy with that. There was no controversy. It was actually, those guys upheld, which is hilarious. We're talking about the controversy of this fight or whatever it is, but they actually scored it just right.
Yeah, it wasn't a robbery.
They really scored it just right. Yeah. I mean, a couple of guys saw it for GSP in round one, which was very close. One guy, you know what I mean? So it's like, they actually upheld it the way it's supposed to be. But maybe those you know, having .5s in there actually simplifies it. You know, that's what we don't know because nobody has experimented with this.
Well, they have experimented. They did it in California in the amateurs, and they said something like, it was something like only 3% of fights that went to a decision were changed by the point.
Okay, but
amateur
fights look nothing like UFC fights.
But generally speaking, you know, they were only using it, or they were only studying it in terms of how a decision would play out. Let's judge it 10-9 on this hand and judge it by the half-point scoring system on this hand and see how many fights are affected. It was only something like 3%.
I think it's a crazy study group. It's like, well, this disease, you know, wondering if a disease will affect humans and you're only studying mice. You can start by studying mice. Eventually you need to graduate. I think the reality is, and I don't know if the half-point system might be a disaster. I don't know. My point is, we don't know. And anybody who says, it's this system, oh, it's that system, oh, it's that system, we don't know. And we're not going to know until we test. Because these amateur fights, sometimes they go to decisions. It's like M1 where it's just rolling all over each other, or there's just car crashes. Go to an amateur show. There's 75,000 fights on the card, and they all end within 30 seconds because someone eats a right hand, and it's one big fat slob versus somebody who trains at a real gym. Like, that's your study sample? It doesn't work that way. You need to have what you're actually, the same level that you're comparing it against. Otherwise, you're not fixing anything. I don't think.
So, too, we don't know anything until the outcome. As long as it's in place that we don't know what's actually happening officially until the outcome is read, until the end of the fight. Like, we don't know what's going on. I think that's you're always going to have controversy because people are seeing the thing happen the way they see it happen. They're not everybody's thinking of 5 individual fights within a 5-round fight like the judges are supposed to be doing. You know, it's like you're looking at more the essence of the fight, which is who's beating up the guy more in the end. You know, that's, you know, so you're always going to have those things, and however they bridge that gap, if they have to announce to people at home at least, these are the official scores, whatever's going on between rounds, so you're always going to have that, you know? It's always going to be a controversy, even when they do it right, which they did on this last one.
Around 20 or so years ago, in the British boxing scene, they actually implemented .5 scoring. The fans hated it. They were confused by it. The TV networks hated it, and the TV networks actually lobbied to the British Boxing Commission to take it away, and they went back to the 10-point must system.
At least they tried.
They tried. You're right.
At least they tried.
Just saying. Okay, there's a lot else going on. I mean, that's the big story, UFC 167. Let's just touch on a couple of things before we go, because we are running out of time. Ben Askren, it's a soap opera, a daily one, released by Bellator last week. Dana White said he's not interested in him. World Series of Fighting is interested in him. He's he's putting out the right kind of vibes right now, making deals with the UFC. I'll fight Rory McDonald. If I lose, don't pay me and I'll retire. All that stuff. What's your prediction? At the end of the day, does he sign with the UFC?
It's a hopefully. I'll say yes.
Yeah.
I'll say yes because on sporting grounds, they obviously can't keep him out for very long. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I saw Guto Innocent is going to fight Shane Del Rosario because one of them's injured in the UFC. It's like, what?
But you do understand why he's not.
I understand.
In the UFC.
I understand.
They don't want to play into Bellator's hand. They don't want to play
Fair enough.
that game.
And Jeremy Botter reported that Joe Silva didn't want him, and so they've got their reasons for it. Eventually, I think they'll relent.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll eventually end up with him. Listen, there's a lot of people who think that Ben Askren is a top 10 welterweight. The UFC is in the business of finding out who the best fighter in the world is. If he's in the top 10, that means he's at least in the conversation, and he deserves a chance. For Dana to say like he needs to go out and win some other fights, I mean, there's guys in the UFC who have worse records than Ben Askren are in the UFC. There's guys that he's beaten and are in the UFC.
Or
so
at least got shots, right?
Really, that argument doesn't hold a lot of weight. I think in the end that they will probably get him as long as they can kind of sort of get him at a discounted price.
Who was it that just called him out on UFC tonight? Was it Damian Maia?
Damian Maia.
I mean, it helps when guys like that want to fight him. Well, it just shows everybody, even from the UFC brass, that there are guys in the UFC who are interested in fighting him just because he has a name and a certain thing behind him. So I think ultimately they will work something out with him. The good thing for Ben Askren, he fights in maybe the one division that's the deepest of all besides maybe lightweight. There's a surplus of good, maybe not great welterweights in World Series of Fighting. So even if he went that route, I feel like they'd still find some good fights for him. There are still some good names. Whether Fitch obviously comes to mind, but there's other guys too. At least it's not like a heavyweight or something like that, where if he only has one place he can go, otherwise he's going to hurt himself ultimately. But I believe he ends up in the UFC.
Okay, we'll continue with the quick hits. Rampage Jackson made his Bellator debut. Pretty good rating on a Friday night.
I was there.
You were there, that's right. So where do they go from here with him? Can he be the guy who gets them to the next level, or is he just a guy that, every few months or so fans will watch him and that's pretty much it?
I think it's the latter. I think he's good to have as long as he's winning, which is going to be, we'll see how long that train rides.
Right.
I don't know how that, I don't think he beats Attila Vey, and I don't know if he beats Emmanuel Newton, to be honest, but he might beat some other guys. He's almost, and I hate to say this, but he's almost, not quite, at a point where he was like Kimbo, where it's like, I just want to see him knock somebody out. I don't really care who it is. He's not quite there yet, because I think people all said on TV he looked slow. I will say in person, I thought he didn't look amazing. I thought he looked good. In person, I thought he looked good. So for now, it's okay. They're going to keep him out of the tournament, I think, and at least another year, maybe more than that, he'll be valuable to them, but it's not going to change the game for them.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I think that he's good for popping a rating for him, for them. Put him on Spike TV. People are always going to have interest in him. Obviously, the guy built up a name over time, and he's entertaining. He's amusing when he does his interviews. So he's got some value in that regard. If you can match him up the right way, I think keeping him out of the tournament is probably a good idea. That to kind of give him matchups that are to his liking. Let's be honest, he's complained about matchmaking in the past, so I don't think he went to Bellator to be matched up with wrestlers. So as long as they put him in fights where he can kind of do his thing, I think he'll kind of help them draw some eyeballs to those fights at least.
A couple more wins, just a couple more wins, and then people can start to skew and look back on his record and be like, you know what, the Ryan Bader really was the only bad fight he had. He had, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
like, how people do. Because a couple of those guys, John Jones obviously is fighting. He's the title holder, and Glover Teixeira, he's fighting for the title, and Rashad Evans, he's had a resurgence. So you're looking back and you're like, well, he lost to really good guys at the time. It's weird how it works. The perception sort of shifts. So I think if he keeps, he wins another fight or two, they could ride it for as long as he'll keep winning. You know what I mean?
Yes or no? Do you want to see Dan Henderson fight again?
Yes. I wouldn't, depending on what the circumstances are. I think his days as a title contender are over. I don't think he necessarily has to hang them up, although he's probably pretty close, but I don't think he has to close the door if he's not ready to just yet.
He still has enough, in your opinion?
A little bit. And again, not as a title hunter, but as a guy who can be on a card and be valuable and fight some good opponents, yes.
I'd like to see him get one more try. I mean, this is the first time he's been knocked out of his career. He's knocked out by a guy who punches like a mule kicks. And I'd like to see him fight at 185. He did the 205 thing in the past and kind of going back and forth. I'd like to see him try 185 and give it one last try there and see how far he can ride it. But I don't have any interest in him as a 205er anymore.
I mean, ultimately, his self-preservation was really, for a 43-year-old guy who's been in the ring against as many monsters he's held up really well. This was the first time he's been knocked out, so I'd like to see him. And he does have, he can fluctuate. He could even go to heavyweight. He could just be a guy who puts on fun fights at this point. He could.
Heavyweight.
He could go to heavyweight. He likes fighting heavyweight.
One more yes or no question. Tough 18 coming to an end next week. Is this the season that brought you back? Did the women do enough, or is it same old, same old?
I think we both know the answer to that question.
I'm not sure.
I probably watched.
Like reality TV.
I watched more Top Chef than I have of,
nice.
and probably what's the one on? Well, anyway, Top Chef and
Real Housewives.
Duck Dynasty.
Duck Dynasties. No, I don't watch Duck.
Total
Dynasty. I'm
Divas?
the beard. I don't need to watch Duck Dynasty. No, not Total Divas, but the one where they make the stuff on Bravo, the clothing one.
No one
Anyway,
knows, but-
I don't know.
Project Runway.
Yes, Project Runway.
That's
I
a
watched
good show.
more of that with my wife than I have with. I'm Ultimate Fighter Ship of Sale. I don't care anymore. Yeah.
Mike?
kind of status quo for me. You know, I'm usually interested because I know some of these guys are going to end up in the UFC. So, but as far as like the dynamic, it was interesting between Ronda and Misha. But the thing is, you have to come forward with something new each time. So if there's not, you know, some great dynamic next time, it's not a big deal. Obviously, they have Chael and Vanderlei set up, and that should bring some explosiveness to the.
Who knows if that's even going to air here? I'm sure they'll find a way. But
it'll air.
Yeah. What do you think?
No big difference for me. I mean, ultimately, I watched this one because of the Tate Rousey dynamic, and it's interesting to see with the women coming up and everything else what was going to happen. But we're going to go right back into the status quo, the usual thing. So it's not. I don't really have much interest.
At the end of the day, it comes down to the fights, right? I mean, it's a show about fighters trying to get in. So either you're going to be interested in watching that part of it or not. Everything else is sort of secondary.
Yeah, that is a problem. All right, last thing, guys. We don't have a show next week. And it is Thanksgiving here in the United States. Just wanted to do something fun. What are you most thankful for this year in MMA? The year is coming to a close. I think right now, if it ended today, it'd probably be the best year of MMA action ever, or at least in recent memory, if you want to contest that. I'll start. Why not? We're talking about the women, so it's a good segue there. I think the invasion, if you will, or the influx of women into the UFC, the breath of fresh air that they have been, from a media standpoint, just talking to them, how happy they are. I think of Kat Zingano crying on her way to the cage against Misha Tate in her debut in April. They're just such a breath of fresh air. There are so many interesting stories. Just saying this is the first mother inside the octagon, things like that. They've brought a whole new layer of stories to talk about, and they've delivered. Their fights, for the most part, have been fun. I don't like when people say every time the women deliver. You know, we should just treat them like every other fighter, and not as this is the second fight between two Brazilians in England. All that nonsense is tiresome. But they have brought, in my opinion, great excitement and great interest to the UFC, and something was lacking, and I think it's been fun. So I'm thankful for the women coming to the UFC.
Well, I think it's a good choice. I'm actually, shocker, I'm selfish again. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say the MMA Beat, right? And I mean that because it started out with just the three of us, and we had normal. We still have normal mugs.
Sure.
Get to it, Vox Media. The reality is, most MMA media is bad. Most sports media is bad, and we don't ever really get a chance to do anything but like, oh, so and so had the camp of his life, and talk to guys like drawing blood from stone. In this particular case, well, it's the truth. I mean,
Sure.
But now people have it like we get an opportunity to sit around and we get to do things talk about the thing that we love in a way with other people who are like-minded, who do the same things we do, and the fans seem to have responded. You don't get this chance to do this at literally any other site or anyone else who covers MMA. It's only here. You got lucky. You got grandfathered in.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Sure.
I think you can't, if you're trying to make a career out of this, you can't leave the year or look at Thanksgiving and say, well, this is just another thing that I do at my work. No, it's pretty special that we get to do this. And you've done a great job as a host, and you two are tolerable, but I'm happy to have been here.
I agree. It's a lot of fun.
Barely tolerable to myself. Hey, first of all, I'm thankful that the fans have kind of gone into this corner.
That is the story of the year. We'll talk about that in December.
Turn, right?
We'll talk about that in December.
Team Thomas, Team Beard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing thing. They used to be like, F this guy.
Yeah.
But no, I would say I'm kind of grateful and thankful for kind of the influx of talent that seems to be sort of seeping into the UFC space and the MMA space right now. When you look at, this is a year of transition in a lot of ways. You said it was probably the best year action-wise in the UFC. I think part of the reason is because we got to see some title changes and we got to see some changing in the guard. And, Chris Weidman pops up and ends Anderson Silva's amazing legendary reign, and Anthony Pettis becomes a champion, a guy that people have always loved watching. He's so dynamic and young and has all these great moves he does in the cage. People like Conor McGregor kind of popped up out of nowhere, became this overnight phenomenon. Brandon Thatch recently, Johnny Hendricks, Gustafsson, sure. Johnny Hendricks. I mean, a guy who could very well be champion if one judge had scored it differently, and a guy that I think is going to be reckoned with for a long time to come. Gustafsson as well. I mean, so a lot of new talent that's put themselves on the map as someone to look out for. Writing about guys like Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre has been fine for a long time. It's been great, but it's always great
sure.
to get new stories and to see new fighters that people are getting invested in.
Final word.
Matt Brown.
Matt Brown.
No, I'm kidding.
That's not a bad choice.
I'm appreciative of Matt Brown. Going off of what you're talking about, I mean, the matchmakers themselves, I'm very thankful for, but it's more the concept of the matchmaking mentality. When UFC, they don't protect the champions, and we've seen it. and especially in these last few months with the belts changing hands and coming very near to changing hands a couple of times with just GSP and Hendricks going down while we were talking tonight. They do not protect the champions. They make them vulnerable. And if you talk to those matchmakers, I know they don't like to do any publicly, but if you talk to them, their idea is always to book the guy that's going to beat the champion. To me, that mentality has really been refreshing in the whole time covering the sport. It keeps it very Wild West. It keeps it very, you never know what's going to happen. And there are a few exceptions, when like television is involved with John Jones and Chael Sonnen and say, but for the most part, they always get that guy. They want the guy that's going to challenge a champion. And to me, that's something that's pretty valuable about this sport. That's unique, separates it from boxing and other combat sports. So to me, I'm very appreciative of that.
Separates maybe them from other promotions as well. When you look at the way other promotions are booked. Amen to all of that. Great stuff, guys. And now we want to hear from you, even if you don't live in the US of A and you're not celebrating Thanksgiving next week. Let us know what you're thankful for. The year is about to come to the end, and really, it has been one of the best ever. In my opinion, ever. We'll talk about that in a month, though. So let us know in the comment section below what you're thankful for, and let us know what you think about anything we talked about here on the show today. We're off next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks, of course, right here in our New York City studio. For Luke, Mike, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat.